The 8 and 16-bit consoles weren't safe from the TV license, and in the next, however long it is, you're going to see a collection of videos that show you just how varied these were. Some good, mostly awful though. The deep sea is unpleasant. It's dark, it's oppressive, it's very, very wet, and it's dense with unspeakably ugly fish and sentient weird carrier bags, otherwise known as jellyfish. Quite why anyone will want to go down there just blows my mind, and yet this is where we find the crew of the Seaquest DSV 4600 in this here video game and that their accompanying TV series. Let us head there first though, in our mother-pleasing shaped submersible, and find out what this wet 90s Star Trek-alike show was all about. Running for 57 episodes over 3 years, Seaquest DSV was the brainchild of Rockne S. O'Bannon, the sci-fi writer best known for Farscape and Alien Nation. It was produced by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, which probably gave it a level of shine and longevity that perhaps similarly not very successful shows would have got. The show is set in the futuristic year of 2018 and follows the crew of the Seaquest DSV, a vessel belonging to the United Earth Oceans Organization. The United Earths Organization, or UEO, is a coalition of countries both above and below the sea line. The reason there are countries below the sea is because mankind has exhausted most of the dry natural resources and so has been forced under the sea to find new raw materials for all the mod cons of the 90s, such as VCRs, tab clear, let loose CDs and 3DO controller cables. There follows a TV show reminiscent of its more space-based counterparts like Babylon 5, Farscape and Star Trek, where exploring scientific research, global political intrigue and the crew's interpersonal relationships are explored. And there's also a very clever animatronic dolphin called Darwin. Look at his smooth, happy, grey face. Seaquest DSV was plagued by less than spectacular ratings for much of its run, along with regular cast changes in a desperate attempt to make it all work. Even the two most famous actors in it didn't make it through to the last episode. Stephanie Beacham left after just one series, and ship commander and main star Roy Scheider reduced his role to that of a recurring appearance in the final series. You can't blame him, as he's never had a great deal of fun in the ocean, has he, Bruce the Shark? The role of captain for the third and final series instead was given to other famous actor Michael Ironside. Seaquest DSV ran from 1993 then until 1996. Two different Seaquest DSV games were released. One a side-scrolling 2D undersea adventure for the Game Boy, and the other an isometric sea exploration title on your favourite 16-bit console. Well, provided your favourite 16-bit console was either the Super Nintendo or the Sega Mega Drive. I'm sorry, TurboGrafx fans, there is no rubber dolphin friend for you to be played with. The Game Boy version was published in 1994 by Malibu Games, an offshoot subsidiary of THQ. Programming duties on this one were handled by the small but experienced with handheld games team at Unexpected Developments. It's, well, not that brilliant. You start out in Roy Scheider's Big Blue Lady Satisfier and have to get from point A to point B. The sea here looks pretty shallow as you glide left to right, blasting your sonar to find out how far away your main mission is. Enemies are fairly easy to avoid but pretty tricky to hit with your torpedoes, so you may well be best off just darting between them to get to your desired location. In the mini-games themselves, you will guide one of the Seaquest DSV ships mini vehicles through a maze trying to find canisters all while the creatures of the deep, like eels and octopi, take great exception to this and try their best to smash your vehicle with no small amount of aggression. Yes, you've been angry, we've all been angry, but have you ever been so angry that you've popped off all of your limbs and thrown them at something like this psychologically damaged Octo dude? The Game Boy title is unfortunately very lightweight and repetitive. In an interview with Hardcore Gaming 101, producer Tom Meggs said that they had a strict timetable with a lot of other games for their small team to progress upon at the same time. So it's not really a surprise that this game doesn't pull up a lot of trees, or in this case, seaweed. GamePro seemed to like this nautical jaunt, however. They said Seaquest will keep you happily questing beneath the waves for some time to come. I'd probably bung it in the ocean myself. The 16-bit versions were released in 1994 also, with the Super Nintendo game also coming out courtesy of Malibu Games, but the Mega Drive / Genesis one being published by Black Pearl Software. Really though, none of this matters, they're all subsidiaries of THQ. Programming for both versions of the game were handled by Sculptured Software, who handled a lot of the era's WWF games for Acclaim. The game is based on the maiden series of the show and casts you as an anonymous officer working his way up through the ranks to become the captain of the vessel. I'm not sure where Roy Scheider's Nathan Bridger is during this, or what he thinks about being ousted in favour of this upstart, but, well, there we go. You start out in a simulator, but will eventually progress to the vessel proper, meaning that in the early part of the game, you're simulating a simulator of a submarine. Oh, and you start off as a seaman. Seaman. Your modus operandi is to scooch about the bottom of the ocean, collecting valuable minerals and looking for missions which involve the smaller onboard vehicles. There's a variety of annoying submersibles who really don't like the look of your sexualized craft and will try and torpedo it out of existence. Maybe they're puritanical Christians. You have a range of onboard weaponry of limited ammunition with which to combat these devils of the depths, and a limited armour set upon your ship. Damage can be caused by both enemies and environments, and damage caused to the inhabited underwater buildings will come out of your pay, you bad man. That pay is made by taking out enemy vessels and by going on and completing those aforementioned missions that include salvaging, rescuing lost explorers, exploration and disarming bombs. These missions are performed by using a Thunderbirds-esque combination of the different vehicles you have on board. The Speeder, the Stinger, the Sea Truck and the Probe are all armed, but the Sea Crab and yes, Darwin the Dolphin are unarmed, so it's best to clear the area with the attack vessels and then send in the recovery vehicles to do the collection, be it seafarers or indeed undersea flotsam, jetsam and goods. The money you raise from doing these activities can then be used to buy replacement vehicles for the ones that fall during battle and to get more ammunition. It's an interesting game, this one. It's an undersea variant of a game like Starflight, one of my favourites. While the scope and play area isn't as grand as that game, after all space is a great deal bigger than Earth's sea, it still is an ambitious effort. The combination of which vehicles to use and when during your operations, and even when to attempt an operation itself, due to the current resources, add a level of management, strategy and thought that isn't normally required with your average TV licence. It's not particularly well polished though. There's a clear gap in quality between the two versions too. The Mega Drive version is visually not as strong as its Nintendo counterpart, and the lack of buttons of the Sega Genesis are notable by their absence in this rather control-heavy game. The Super Nintendo then has a definite edge here, although it is not a serious edge. However, both games do have the same main issues. The isometric viewpoint makes it very difficult to line up shots in the main part of the game, an issue which the CPU-controlled enemies don't seem to struggle with. They'll pepper the hull of your dildo craft as you clumsily try and spin your submersible around with the movement circle of an elderly man who's just pooed his pants. The speedier craft in the side-scrolling sections aren't immune to their struggles with this either. That control is still a bit clunky even with the swifter watercraft in a new and different perspective, and it makes it worse that certain enemy vehicles are extraordinarily slim in certain positions, making them very difficult to hit. When armour, ammo and the money used to replace them is at such a premium, it makes it quite a frustrating experience at times that your hits are just not passing muster. Despite these flaws, I did really enjoy playing Seaquest DSV, so perhaps you might as well. CMVG said that fans of the show might enjoy it, as might Simheads, but the sedate play didn't do anything for me. Yes, a pun. It's not over yet either. In fact, it gave me a haddock. You bunch of dads at CMVG, you gave it a 77, didn't you? At least you did in your May 1995 issue. So yes, if you do fancy playing something a little bit different from your 16-bit TV licenses that you're used to, maybe it could be a game you'd like to play. Yes, but I'm the dad, so it's fine. What would an actual mouse make of all this biker mice from Mars business? Do they secretly yearn to ride motorcycles, have patches all over their denim sleeveless jackets, listen to 70s rock music, and act as security at Donald Trump rallies? Is that what you want, mouse? Is it? Do you want a glorious flowing mousy skullet down your back while you wear a bandana over the top of it? Is that what you want? Do you want a bottle of tabby in a bar? I bet you do, but you can't. And until you can, you'll just have to play Konami's Biker Mice from Mars on the Super Nintendo. No, you can't do that either, can you? With your little hands. Pathetic. Biker Mice from Mars debuted on US television in September 1993. It aired in the UK on Channel 4 in 1994. It was even part of the Big Breakfast. Do you know, I can still recite the Big Breakfast address, while much more recent and important facts get neglected and forgotten within minutes. Even like important parts of my job. It's ridiculous. My brain is ridiculous. Anyway, it goes like this. 2 Lockkeepers Cottages, Old Ford Lock, London E32NN. Absolutely pointless information. Biker Mice from Mars was created by Richard Ungar, who headed up the Marvel production studio that gave us this and that X-Men cartoon with that theme under his stewardship. Da-na-na-na-na-dee-da, da-na-na-na-na-dee-da. You know the one. He would later go on to host a US political show bearing his name, which is a curious career path for a fella who came up with crime-fighting alien mice on bikes. Biker Mice, yes, no doubt inspired by the success of that other anthropomorphic animal show, you know, the one with the martial arts tortoises. Well, yeah, along with many, many others at the same time. Well, it was a reasonable success, lasting 3 seasons. And then it had a comeback show 10 years later in 2006. Throttle, Modo and Vinny are the 3 vermin protags, and they are the sole survivors of an invasion of Mars by the sinister Plutarchians. In their escape from their home world, they are shot down by their enemies and they crash land in Chicago, where they meet feisty yet charming lady sidekick Charlene Charlie Davidson. Charlie Davidson, do you see what they did there? They soon discover an underground sect of capitalist monster Plutarchians disguised as humans who are hell-bent on stealing the Earth's resources in a similar manner to what happened to that big red rock that Elon Musk wants to die on. They don't like that, do our valiant and moody rodents, so they seek to protect their new home at all costs from those absolute bastards. And so with that follow 65 episodes and adventures indeed that feature guest stars like Star Trek's Michael Dorn, Beverly Hills 90210's alumni like Tori Spelling, Jason Priestley and Luke Perry, Mark Hamill, the Star Wars guy who loves an animation paycheck, and renter posh villain with good diction David Warner. Toys were made and sold, just not as many as those Ninja Turtles, and video games were also made and also sold. The one we're covering today is of course one of those, but there was also a European exclusive pair during the series' comeback show in 2006 for the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation 2. Both are not very good, and you probably shouldn't play them. The Super Nintendo game, though, it was released in the US in December 1994 and in Europe in 1995. There are differences between the two because in Europe, Snickers plastered the game with adverts for their poor man's Star Bar product, whereas US folks just had to cope with the advert for toys that is the game itself. A Mega Drive version was also planned, but then was sadly binned. Sorry, Sega dudes. See, I'm saying dudes because it sounds all radical. Konami elected to go all in on the biker element of the title as opposed to mice on Mars suffocating due to a lack of oxygen. I do hope they make a sequel one day that features trying to avoid suffocating as a mouse as a play mechanic. However, in this game we are in isometric racing game territory here. And yes, it is very much in the RC Pro-Am and particularly rock and roll racing stable of games. You can select from the three main mice, Throttle, Modo and Vinny, along with three of the series' most insidious gits in Limburger, Grease Pit and Carbuncle. God, they sound like arseholes, don't they, those names? Each of the participants has different attributes. They each have their own unique weaponry and their own specialist ability, with Carbuncle having the longest jump and Vinny having the firmest grip. You try and tell anyone in polite society that you like playing with a mouse because it's got the firmest grip, and see where that gets you, probably getting a cross letter from the RSPCA. Each race is weapon smattered chaos, and if your chosen racer ends up doing well enough, you'll have a bit of dollar to improve your vehicle in the workshop for the next race. You can adorn your vehicle with more weaponry, engine and other upgrades that you so wish. I heartily recommend you make yourself a menace to those other road users. Go on, you've earned it. And don't you worry, the other road users will be definitely souping up their vehicles too. The idea of each level, Grand Prix, is that you finish in the top 3 so you qualify for the next stage. This game is firmly in rock and roll racing territory, albeit with a Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic rather than the dad rock one of rock and roll racing. Perhaps your first thought will be that it doesn't control quite as intuitively as Interplay's classic metal music Motorama. It is different from that and rock and roll racing, as no matter which direction the bike will always steer in the same way. That doesn't sound weird, but it does feel weird at first. After a couple of laps, your brain will auto-adjust to its unusual scheme though, and actually the quick lane change buttons being set to L and R add an extra level of fluidity to your steering. All your weapons will replenish on a lap-by-lap basis, which will result in you relying on hammering your character's ability as much as your riding skill. Yes, this is pretty egregious in things like Mario Kart, but here it is whole new levels of button mashery to get you into a better position on the track. A real leveller in this game is the course-specific power-up. This is also replenished at the end of each lap and will give you a nitro or money to spend in the shop between levels. However, if you're doing particularly badly, it will definitely give you a little Blue Shell-esque leg up with a nitro, the power of invincibility for a short time, an earthquake that will slow down your opponents, or best of all, a clock that just stops them dead for about 5 seconds. This is perhaps where Biker Mice loses a little bit more ground to its more illustrious forebears. That was more skill based, along with its course design not being quite as coherent. Some walls and environmental hazards, particularly the fans, seemingly spring out of nowhere on your first playthrough, and the amount of firepower being exchanged in the middle of the pack of racers could see you go from a solid first to a frustrating last from that one single mistake. And it can do that very often unless you're completely comfortable with the course layouts. Now, 2-player modes do extend the fun, and you really should see more people, so grab another controller, grab a buddy and sit them down, Squire. You can play Biker Mice from Mars and then discuss each other's hopes and dreams and maybe kiss for a while. That's on you if you do that bit. Depends how close you are. Graphically, well, it's 16-bit Konami, so you're getting gorgeous graphics whether you like it or not. That said, as bright and colourful as they are, there's no Mode 7 flash trickery, so the look is pretty but perfunctory. It's smooth, and there's plenty of variety across the stages, and you know what? I think that's the main thing with a game like this. And what with it being a 16-bit Konami game, you get 16-bit Konami music, and that can never be a bad thing. It's amazing how easy it is to tell a game's music has been done by Konami. It just has that sound, doesn't it? It's simple stuff, this game, occasionally teeth-jarringly difficult, but it's a fun, underrated gem. So find the nearest mouse and sellotape it to a motorcycle, why don't ya? It's what they want, I think. CMVG said that the racetracks do not have enough obstacles to make the game particularly interesting or varied, and they gave it a 68% in their January 1995 issue. GamePro liked it a little bit more in their March 1995 issue. They said it had good gameplay, cool characters, easy control and variety. The Biker Mice will be taking the checkered flag back to Mars. Hey GamePro, that planet is dead. All their friends are dead. You monsters, why would they want to go back there? Would you take an alien into your home? It sounds like a party political broadcast by the BNP, but it isn't, because I'm not sure that I would. I mean, you could find out that their extraterrestrial biology does some pretty odd things. I mean, what if the beast fully molted all of its fur off in like an hour? That would require a lot of Hoover maintenance. And what if, you know, he got ill due to our unusual terrestrial bacteria and one of his eyes swelled to the size of a living room? Where would you go for help exactly? You can't share your settee with a 12-foot wide eye and its whimpering owner, can you? It might just like explode and cover you with outer-worldly optic fluid that turns your face skin into a substance that sort of is quite undescribable, but would probably best be describable, if we could describe it, as a cross between peanut cracknel and Shiba Inu tongue. That is not for me. You can go and live with someone else, A.L.F. Debuting in 1986, or rather crash landing in 1986, you see what I did there, Gordon Shumway is an outer-towner who finds himself hiding out in the suburban household of the Californian middle-class Tanner family. The family make a promise to Gordon to protect him from the probing clutches of the US Air Force, and so he hangs out like a wisecracking hairy Anne Frank, downing beer and eyeing up the delicious meaty flanks of every cat in the neighbourhood. It's not long until the charismatic Melmac immigrant squirms his way into the Tanners' hearts, and they give him a nice acronymic name based on his status of being an alien life form, that of course being A.L.F. A.L.F was incredibly popular for a short period of time, notching up 4 series and a total of 106 episodes. And of course becoming one of the first touchstones of everyone's remember the 80s, eh? Remember the 80s? Nostalgia. Brain blankets. Brain blankets. So cosy. Keep me away from the modern times. And yes, it ended with a cliffhanger of A.L.F being taken by the feds. But no, that wasn't the end of A.L.F. Not only was there 2 animated series, but there was also a direct sequel one-off movie showing A.L.F alive and well and living at the airbase. So no, A.L.F wasn't torn apart by inquisitive scientists. No, not even. Hell, he even made a sort of comeback in the mid-2000s with a talk show, but none of these comebacks have got close to the success of the Melmacians' cat-bothering first attempt at stardom. Such was A.L.F's ubiquity in merchandise, apparel and even German pop albums that it comes a slight surprise to me that only 2 proper video games exist of A.L.F, and not on systems you'd expect. So yes, there was one early adventure called A.L.F's First Adventure on the PC, Atari ST and Commodore 64, where you must steer Gordon's Melmacian Bonts around a street maze full of felines. And then there's this, the game that we're playing today, the Nexa developed Master System title simply called A.L.F. There were also a couple of PC edutainment titles too, but I'm not about to get a learning from a puss-chewing reprobate from beyond the stars. No thank you, sir. I do find it incredibly surprising, given the worldwide appeal, that an Ocean, an Alternative or a High-Tech didn't snap up the A.L.F license for a UK 8-bit micro platformer or something. And it's even more astonishing to me that there's an A.L.F game on Sega's console of the time and not Nintendo's pale grey lunchbox. It's incredible to me that this didn't make it onto the old NES.
Oh no!
So yeah, in this, A.L.F is forced from the safe enclosure of the Tanner household into the suburban terror of upstate California, with only his hairy frame and his wiles to get the parts he requires for his spaceship. And the one thing I think of when I look at A.L.F in his full form here in this adventure is, I bet his bum fur looks disgusting after he's eaten a dodgy cat that didn't agree with him. Ew, Winnets. Quite why he's decided to go and find spaceship parts now as opposed to the previous 4 years of his life on Earth, I don't know. Apparently he wants to go and meet some of his pals on Mars, which has given him a bit of motivation. If I were the Tanner family, I'd have been miffed that after all his leeching, he could have just simply completed a quest in less than half an hour and sodded off home. His spacecraft will require you to go on a quest, finding parts from all over the neighbourhood, and will take him through a plethora of dangerous vistas and locales, all while being pursued by the alien task force and being beset by local life, both wild and human in nature. The first real struggle A.L.F faces is twatting bats with a salami in order to get a gold nugget from a shack in a cave that the Tanners have never realised was in their basement. This isn't TV show accurate, this. The salami, yes salami though, has the range of an acting class from Dean Gaffney. You can swing it around willy-nilly and you might hit the bats or you might not hit the bats. It is already starting to look like a miserable experience with this A.L.F console game. After finding a few items around town and in the Tanner's house, you'll then take the hairy chap into an incredibly deep pond in the Tanner's back garden that contains treasures for young Gord to spend on quest items at the local high street. The Tanners apparently, although they didn't show it in the series, lived in a Goonies-style pirates' cove or something. The high street is perilous too, with dogs, agents and cyclists. Determined to send our friend A.L.F to his grave, it's fairly easy to dodge them, just sort of walk down the middle of the road. It's another big example of the developers not taking a lot of time or using a lot of talent to make this game. A.L.F must then fly into space on his weird scooter thing, dodging air and space detritus to head to the moon to get a spaceship repair kit, whereupon the game ends. That's it. The whole game, should you know where you're going and you can put up with its various quirks, can be wrapped up in 20 minutes. You won't do it on your first go because several encounters in the game are exercises in absolute frustration due to the poor controls, the absolutely abysmal collision detection and the erratic motion of the adversaries. If I'm being kind to A.L.F, it plays sort of like a much smaller low-rent Jack the Nipper from the ZX Spectrum 48K. Baddies will randomly appear on the side of the screen, leading to unfair deaths as well. It's a shoddy product all round, in all honesty. It's not as poor as Generation Pixel's favourite TV game of all time, the Flintstones, but it's not far off. You don't watch paint dry like in that game, but hell's bells, playing it sure feels like you're watching paint dry. The music is a series of looped ear hate. There's no sexy saxophone theme tune from the TV series, and there's absolutely zero in the way of sound effects. The graphics are pretty colourful, but they are very simplistic in both look and especially in animation. It's not a very good game, this. It's poorly thought out, it's poorly conceived, it's poor all round. A low point for the Sega Master System, if I ever saw one. What a shame that my first Sega Master System exclusive review is of this. But these are the choices that I make. Sega Power said in their issue 49 that A.L.F was pure undiluted swill. Well, I mean, at least it's undiluted. If it was diluted, it would spread more easily and probably unlock a few more smells. So maybe that's a good thing, but no, it's not. They gave it 1 star. Sega Pro gave it a 16 and said, spend 30 quid on this and you'll feel like a real spaz. Jesus Christ, Sega Pro. You're going to get me thrown off YouTube. It's the early 90s, it's the early 90s, it's contextually okay to say it, don't worry. I wonder though what Sega Pro would make of its going rate today. What would they call you if you went out and spent £500 on this as it's being advertised on eBay? Gargoyles. Grotesque stone statues designed to funnel water away from a roof and from eroding the mortar of a masonry wall beneath. Gargouille is derived from throat in French, which of course references how they use their throats as drains to filter the water away. So there is a practical reason for these creepy demonic fellas other than to give birds and people who look up the heebie-jeebies. I mean, it could be that, couldn't it? That these are like ancient drains, but it could also be that they are a species of nocturnal creatures that were petrified in 10th century Scotland that have been reawakened as vigilantes in 1990s New York. It could be that as well. And for the purposes of this video, we are taking that second explanation as gospel as we look at the Mega Drive exclusive Gargoyles by Buena Vista Interactive Games. But before we take a goosey gander at the Gargoyles video game, it's important to see what all this is about, else a lot of us will be shrugging and mystified by all this chicanery. I didn't watch a great deal about it, so I hope you're as curious as me. Gargoyles was an animated series produced by the Walt Disney Television Studio, which had been on a hell of a run over the previous decade with shows like Tailspin, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck and DuckTales. This show was a bit of a departure from those shows, no doubt an attempt by Disney to get some of the shine off the likes of some of the darker tones of superhero cartoons such as Batman the animated series, the X-Men cartoon and the Spiderman animated series. This is of course during a time when Disney didn't have ready access to over 1,000 heroes since they bought Marvel. So they invented their own Dark City vigilantes. Gargoyles, as previously mentioned, finds these stone uggos frozen into stone form for 1,000 years before a billionaire has them moved to a skyscraper from their original moorings on a Scottish castle. And yes, 1,000 years previously they had been frozen on the side of that castle and were cursed to remain that way until they were above the clouds. And you know what? Being on a skyscraper, that is above some clouds. So yes, it's all a lot of old plot hookum to have muscular, scary Batman-like demon heroes in New York, and we should all be for it, in my opinion. It's a fondly remembered but short-lived series that ran for 3 years, and is an extreme rarity in the fact that it hasn't made a comeback as yet. However, rumours of a movie adaptation continue to be made, though given Disney's hero cup doth overfloweth, I can't see it myself, certainly not soon. Oh, and one more thing. Gargoyles had quite the connection with Star Trek. Appearing in the show as voices is a veritable who's who of Star Trek fan favourites, with Jonathan Frakes, Marina Sirtis, Nichelle Nichols, Michael Dorn, LeVar Burton, Kate Mulgrew, Cole Meany, Avery Brooks and Brent Spiner all having roles in the show. But enough about spacefarers in skin-tight tracksuits, dallying about the place, trying to solve other people's problems. Let's get back to the Rockefellers and their video game. Gargoyles was an exclusive for the Mega Drive, or, if you prefer, the Genesis, as I'm forced to say for that one person from Shooty School, Arizona, who will watch this. A Super Nintendo version was also planned, but was ultimately cancelled. However, source code was released by Chief Walt Disney computer programmer Chris Shrigley in 2012. This was indeed the last game by Walt Disney Computer Software before they were rebranded and reorganised as Disney Interactive. While being the former company, their most famous title was probably the Super Nintendo Rocketeer game, a game that was notoriously bad, but don't hit the skedaddle train as yet, it's not quite as awful as that. Gargoyles is an 18-level side-scroller starring that great grey gargoyle Goliath, as he takes on the duty of destroying the Eye of Odin, a relic that will prove to be a pain in the tush to anyone who likes the Earth in one piece and all unapocalyptic. The game starts off pretty well. A horde of Vikings set upon the Gargoyles' ancestral home of Castle Wyvern back in the Dark Ages, and it's there that we're introduced to the game's rather attractive graphical style. It's a post-Aladdin Mega Drive Disney game, all hand-drawn sprites and smooth animation. You will certainly see more ugly Mega Drive games, that's for sure. However, now's probably a terrible time to say this, that I preferred Aladdin on the Super Nintendo. Yes, I'm one of those contrarian dickheads.
This is the best looking game I've ever seen on the Mega Drive. The graphics are just like you're watching a cartoon. There's nothing special about the gameplay though.
Basically, I found the gameplay in the Mega Drive game was about as fun as parsnip soup. Yeah, it was very, very pretty, far prettier than the Super Nintendo version, but it was a deathly average game for me to play. Part of the issue I had with Jungle Book and Aladdin and Lion King and all of these wonderful 16-bit Sega Disney games were their absolute devotion to animation that for me personally had a detrimental effect to the controls and the feel of the game as a whole. As I say, just to me anyway. And well, that feel is exemplified here by a slightly more complex set of controls that incorporate climbing, throws and a brief hovering flight as well. Still, I'm happy to admit that I am wrong on most things, and my reluctance to accept Sega Aladdin as a bona fide classic is at best a farcical example of me being an absolute idiot. The opening levels on Gargoyles are absolutely grade A hand-drawn Sega Disney platformer goodness, if that floats your vessel. It has its niggles though. There's a lot of tricky jumps which, in the best case scenario, can have you plummeting back to the base of the screen to reattempt several times. In the worst case scenario, you'll land in lava and burn your whip crack frumpy tail, and your beast will be done. Eventually, you'll get through it though. All the levels are frustrating, but they are achievable with the right attitude, an attitude which unfortunately I do not have. Another issue is the level design doesn't make it immediately obvious on what you have to do if you want to make a bit of progress. But despite this, if you're a fan of these highly animated platformers, I'm sure you'll have a grand old time indeed. The levels set in medieval time are full of hand-drawn Vikings, as well drawn as your Gargoyle himself. It is unfortunately when you get to the present day where I think the game struggles quite a bit. Well, I say present day, it's 1994, but you know what I mean. And well, there's some nice touches here and there. The graphics for the backgrounds remain strong throughout. And there are cool sequences in the game, like when you're on the train, and the bit where you can dive through the roof of the building and crash through several floors because your gargoyle is a big, satchel-bottomed, heavy bum man. That bit certainly made me go, ooh, this is a bit swanky for a 16-bit game. But the problems in the earlier levels come to a head here in the 1994 ones. You see, the vertical levels just get more vertical, and those singular hits that will send you plummeting a long way back to the bottom of where you were climbing from, they get more and more grinding on your temper. And worse, that lava that scorched your rump is removed, and instead of taking slight damage, there's just a big hole where you'll lose a life, and as you only get a few lives and one continue, that'll be the end of the game and probably the end of your tether. These aren't the only problems, however. The hand-drawn Vikings from the earlier levels are replaced by some really crap-looking CG pre-rendered characterless robots. Really dull-looking things they are too. And not only that, they're an absolute beggar to deal with. The hit detection in the game gets infuriating at times when you try and attempt a throw or a punch and it doesn't seem to make contact. All in all, I found Gargoyles an enormous chore. I'm not discounting how ambitious the game is at all. It is, for the most part, a real looker, a real roister-toister of a late 16-bit console effort. The mechanics relating to the agility and fighting of Goliath are really good in concept, but it was always fighting an uphill battle with me. I haven't watched much of the show, I wasn't really a fan of this style of platformer, and my temper is way too short for vertical levels with frustrating elements, no matter how creative and pretty Gargoyles looks. Now, while I didn't like it, plenty of others did. GamePro gave it full marks in February 1996 and reckoned Gargoyles gives you the rewarding gameplay and gorgeous scenery associated with games like Vector Man and Earthworm Jim 2. Game Informer said that if you found joy in Aladdin and The Lion King, you'll receive the same thrill from Gargoyles, but at a darker level. They gave it an 8.5 out of 10 in November 1995. EGM were a little more tempered in their enthusiasm. They gave it scores ranging from 4 out of 10 to 7.5 out of 10, and they said that the controls were frustrating. So for me and EGM, it didn't rock us, but for most, it's a stone cold classic. Yes, puns. I usually end these things with puns, and I'm doing it again now. The first few lyrics of the Funhouse theme tell you all you need to know. Wacky, fun, crazy. It's outrageous. Funhouse, a whole lot of fun. Prizes to be won. Now, only one of those things is true of the high-tech expressions game on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it's not that there are prizes to be won, unless that prize is the abject disappointment in yourself for purchasing such a substandard game. The lyric that applies to both the TV show and the video game is this: "It's outrageous, for truly once you've seen it, it is." If you're a bit more youthful than the majority of my viewers, you may not be familiar, but we used to love covering children with slime in the late 80s and early 90s. And no, it had nothing to do with Jimmy Savile. Funhouse was a children's television quiz show that first emerged from its carapace on American television in 1988 via Fox TV. It was presented by the very youthful J.D. Roth, who was just 19 at the start of the show's run, and it was a gaudily coloured, loud assault on your sugar-addled senses. It was the late 80s, early 90s distilled into its child-damaging, purest form. The giant ziggurat that stood in the centre of the studio, full of crash pads and those little balls you get in the pits at daycare centres. It was a temple that was full of high energy, kids covered in slime, and nursed back to health by dancing twin cheerleaders. Goodness me, so 90s. The premise was two teams of two comprised of a boy and a girl, one team clad in yellow and one team clad in red. Challenges would start with answering questions. Then various challenges would occur, usually with the kids running around and getting covered in slime or trash, looking for prize tokens to get them through to that vital last round. The challenge in the go-karts was an ever-present thing, but all the other challenges would change up on a weekly basis, with the producers of the television show finding new ways to torture children with gunge. Once the gunge had settled, it was time for the winners to enter the eponymous funhouse. The funhouse was where the prizes were, with prize tags hidden throughout its imposing structure. Bikes, super soakers, mega drives, theme park tickets, CD players, CRT televisions, why, they were all on offer for those fleet of foot and hardy of soul. It was hyper-Americana and bloody amazing to boot. And it will come as no surprise to you to learn that every kid in Britain actually wished they were American around this time. Very much so in the late 80s and early 90s, I'd say. And if you were a child at that point and you're claiming otherwise, you're a liar. Or your parents were responsible and made you read books instead, rather than just sit you down in front of the telly. And so, of course, it translated very well to us Brits, with our bloody pogs and our garbage pail kids and our love of American things like hyper-colour t-shirts that were ruined approximately after you washed it for the first time. So yes, we lapped it up. In fact, we loved it even more than the Americans that gave it to us. What with their short attention spans and all. Over there, it only lasted 3 years, whereas ours ran for a decade. Our one was presided over by the most famous haircut of that generation, the mullet. The mullet, which wore DJ Pat Sharp for the duration of the show, was run on ITV by Scottish Television from February 1989 to December 1999. It had everything the US version had. The bright colours, the volume, the gunge, the physicality, the grandeur, the Grand Prix, and we even had our own version of twin cheerleaders in the form of Melanie and Martina Grant. They had a strange career trajectory, those two, singing Every Sperm is Sacred in Monty Python's Meaning of Life, allegedly appearing somewhere in Tim Burton's Batman movie, but I'm buggered if I can find them, and they released an album in Japan. But never mind these dad-pleasing clones. When I was 10, I didn't care about them and their long legs. I, along with countless others, instead would have given our hairless scrotums to go on that show and compete in its many challenges. It was on Nightmares level. maybe. What Nightmare lacked in slime, it made up for in bad CG. But I digress. The Funhouse license bore 2 games, published by Hi-Tech Entertainment. There was an MS-DOS version that came out at roughly the same time as the NES game we're covering today. That version had a trivia round and a selection of arcade games, including the Funhouse Maze. It was alright. Outside of Funhouse, Hi-Tech Expressions released a whole host of licensed titles on the 8 and 16-bit formats, from Barbie, Tom and Jerry and Beethoven the Dog, to things like The Hunt for Red October. Hi-Tech Expressions eventually folded at the dawn of the 32-bit era in 1995. Which means we never got the polygonal Beethoven the Dog game that we all wanted. God damn you, you swines. The NES version of Funhouse was put together by Real-Time Associates, who were still about in 1995, and so did give us 32-bit games. Thanks for the Elmo PlayStation game, fellas. I'll be sure to play that at some point. I won't. Funhouse is a 72-level top-down 2D scrolling shoot-'em-up stroke puzzle game, with the player assuming the role of one of the child contestants from the show. You're tasked with twatting a number of targets with some deft tomato tossing in this game. When all the targets have been struck, a key opens up in the final target that, upon collection, takes you to the next room, and so on and so on. If that sounds a bit too straightforward, allow me to sprinkle Lego bricks in front of your bare feet. Some levels will add a numerical order element to the targets, placing them in an unusual sequence and therefore making it much harder to clear the level. The timer for these levels is unremittingly tight. But the obstacles to success do not end there. The ground is a bit like your dad as a child, as it's rarely present, often replaced by things like conveyor belts or ice or pools of slime, which will affect your progress. Which is further hampered by the utilisation of tank controls and the fact that your character is on rollerblades, so he has the turning circle of a fat whale and inertia reminiscent of Mercury on the back of a wet dolphin. And the rooms are full of banana cannons and sentient slime. Sentient slime! I've seen both versions of the blob, and I know that children should not be anywhere near this skin-melting horror. The enemies will either hinder your progress by pushing you into the walls, the conveyors, ice or the floor slime, or they will drain away your precious time, and you need that time. I bet you thought this game sounded easy when I was talking about just throwing pre-ketchup lumps at discs, didn't you? Luckily, you've got J.D. Roth giving you encouragement between each level, because sadly, a UK release never happened, and therefore the mullet nor its Pat Sharp accessory never made it onto the NES. JD, he looks either like a youthful Tim Allen here or Simon Parkin, and I can't decide which, and I'm probably wrong about that anyway. My eyes are old and my brain is addled by time. What do you want from me? Anyway, JD Roth has seen that this 72 level maze is probably child abuse, and so has decided to throw various power-ups around the arena to assist our boys and girls that are competing. He's like the Oscar Schindler of 90s attitude telly. There's speedy skates, clocks to increase your time, and coins to give you a score boost and potentially the chance of some extra lives. And the game you see before you, it's not just one event, it's the whole game. And it's fine, I guess. It reminds me of something like a Codemasters £2.99 Spectrum budget game, except it's an expensive Nintendo cartridge. But that's not the main issue, is it? It's not Funhouse. Like, at all. There's no trivia round, there's no multiple challenges, there's not even a Funhouse. Well, apart from the static screen between rounds, showing that great monolith. There it is, looking all diverse with like multiple levels and different things to do. Not replicated in the game though, is it? The MS-DOS game at least attempts to replicate the TV show's varied rounds, and I'm not even convinced there was ever a challenge in the show that involved throwing tomatoes at targets while on rollerblades, even after a Google search. Tell me in the comments if you think differently, if you know differently, if there was a challenge in Funhouse where there was a kid on roller skates throwing tomatoes at targets. I don't mind if it's the British version, the American version, or even the version from Tajikistan. I don't think that there was ever an event on Funhouse, any of the versions, where kids on rollerblades were charged with throwing tomatoes at targets. There's not even a crowd of screaming nipplings, just blobs and shapes as backgrounds. So it does have slime, it does have the logo, it has JD Roth, and it has the level start sequences which show you the funhouse that you'll never get to explore. But apart from that, there's nothing here that connects this game with the television show. Like, maybe, I guess, this could have been a challenge on the TV show, but it wasn't. And to have the whole game as it, well, that's not really enough, is it? If you purchased this game, it's because you're part of the 99.9% of kids who wanted to go on the show, but never got to experience running around that great mythical wonderment that was the Funhouse and getting all those prizes. This game is bound to be a disappointment as a result. It seems to me that this game is one of those titles that started out as something else and then just got the license stapled onto it. And that's borne out actually by the fact that Real Time Associates released a very similar title on the Game Boy shortly after called Out of Gas that had nothing to do with Funhouse at all. All in all, it's a fairly playable title, but an absolutely egregiously cynical use of the Funhouse license. Though well done for the dad joke pun level names. Still, it's not enough for the mullet. He's not amused. Game Players magazine warned their readers accordingly in August 1991. They said, "We cannot really recommend this game and do believe that true fans should be warned not to expect the fast-paced action of TV's Funhouse." Oh well. "40 years, it's a long time. That's like half the average lifespan of a human. So there's this new Indiana Jones film, and it's over half a lifetime since the first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, came out. Harrison Ford is still in it, half a human lifetime later. Oh, good Lord, insert your own ageism jokes here. We know that they're going on in both of our heads after all. I mean, he was pretty old in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And that movie, which may or may not have existed and may or may not have come out in 2008, because I'm still in denial that that movie exists, well, that was a decade and a half before this came out. And at the time of recording, the reviews for the new one, they don't look so hot. If only we could look at Indiana Jones then, the same age as he was in that perfect original 80s trilogy. Well, I can do you one better than that. How about when he was even younger than that? He'd be very spry, wouldn't he? And well, yes, that would be the young Indiana Jones, a period of his life of which two separate games exist. One is on the Mega Drive and one on the NES. Now, I want you to imagine that you're that old knight in Last Crusade.
Knew you would come.
And he's presented you with a series of Indiana Jones video games. And he's asked you to pick out the good young Indiana Jones game out of the two.
Which one is it? You must choose. Choose wisely.
And you can mull on that for a little while, because before we get a whipping and a stealing artefacts, what in the name of Short Round is this movie hero doing on my TV game series? Well, you dunderhead, it was a TV show. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles debuted on ABC 3 years after the original trilogy's closer, The Last Crusade, and it was broadcast in 1992. It ran for 2 series, with 4 made-for-TV movies that finished up in 1996. George Lucas was more directly involved than his partner in crime Steven Spielberg this time, acting as the executive producer and writing an extensive timeline of Jones's life from 1905 onwards. The Last Crusade, of course, had a whip crack, if you will, at Indy's youth, with River Phoenix playing Henry Jr. in an opening escapade which shoehorned as many of the Indiana Jones character traits and accessories origins into about 10 minutes. Fancy all that happening in the same day, eh? Still, it gave Lucas the taste for the adventures of a young Indiana Jones, and so he pursued the idea of a TV show about the archaeologist's formative years. He approached River Phoenix and Harrison Ford about appearing, but both didn't really fancy working on the television show at that stage, although Ford did turn up in one episode as he bookended an entry called The Mystery of the Blues. Ford here was playing Indiana Jones at about 50 years old. This was a format that was extended to the whole show. However, they used an even older Indy doing the bookending and narrating task, using character actor George Hall portraying Indiana Jones as a rather broken down 90-year-old. We're getting pretty close to that with Harrison Ford now, aren't we? Oh Christ, everything makes me feel so old. The tales that the older Indiana Jones would regale would be about him at the ages of 8 to 10 and then 16 to 21. These roles were played by Corey Carrier and Sean Patrick Flannery, respectively. It took Indiana Jones through his childhood, through the First World War, and through to the Great Depression. During his adventures, Jones would come across many famous faces from those eras, like Al Capone, Teddy Roosevelt, Leo Tolstoy, Ernest Hemingway, Pablo Picasso, and a younger Winston Churchill, usually playing a part in shaping their destinies. It was good fun 90s telly hookum, but perhaps a little bit overly ambitious. It was very, very expensive to make, and viewing figures showed that the public didn't really have a taste for a Indiana Jones without the screen-filling charisma of Harrison Ford at that stage. It looked the part and was packed with an incredible who's who of guest stars, writers and directors. Joe Johnston, Frank Darabont and Carrie Fisher did behind the camera work, and in front of the camera, well, how does Christopher Lee, Max von Sydow, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Anthony Daniels, Daniel Craig, Tom Courtenay, Liz Hurley, Anne Hesh, Vanessa Redgrave, Keith David and Terry Jones sound, just for starters? It was a show beloved by critics as well, winning 6 Emmys and several other major television awards. It just didn't, for whatever reason, stick with the public. I think perhaps it would have been more popular and would have worked better had they waited another 30 years and utilised Disney+. I suspect Harrison Ford would have been more on board with it, the budget and effects would have been a bit sharper, and well, I think it probably would have been a lot more preferable than the old boy running around on our cinema screen in 2023. As it was, of the 70 stories that Lucas had planned and made outlines for, less than half were put on the small screen. A shame. So what about the games then? Well, remember I gave you that task of being the knight at the end of Last Crusade and asking you to choose between the 2 titles? Well, let's see how that would have panned out.
12 seconds later.
He chose poorly.
Yes, the inferior one of the 2 is unquestionably 1994's The Instruments of Chaos on the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis. Look, it's the flashier cup. Yeah, see? It's clever. I thought this one through. This was published by Sega of America and was programmed by the Brian A. Rice Incorporated development house in Chicago, who made the only Home Alone game of the time that wasn't absolute dogshite. Still, what an incredibly bland name for a development house. Brian A. Rice Incorporated. In the Instruments of Chaos, Jones is doing a bit of counter-spy work for France, as those dastardly Germans are travelling the globe gathering advanced weaponry technologies from various nefarious sorts in order to use against the Allies in World War I. The journey takes Indy to Tibet, India, Egypt and England before a final daring dart into the eye of the German storm itself. You are armed with a revolver, grenades and your trusty whip, which can be flipped and swung about like Castlevania 4, or alternatively your man meat when you think that nobody's looking at home. Indy bounds about in a well-animated fashion around numerous old architecture. His trip to London, for instance, takes him both a dangerously stormy jaunt on Tower Bridge and into Big Ben, for example. The sprites are crisp and the backgrounds are detailed, with some nice occasional parallax scrolling going on behind the action. It all looks very competent until you interact with it. All I can say is thank heavens for save states. This game is hard. It is very hard, but not in a good, oh let's try again kind of hard way. It's hard in a really poor game design way. That's the worst kind of hard. Controls are where the first issues set in. It controls absolutely terribly. Indy will burst into a sprint if you hold the direction button down for too long, not gradually building up momentum, just going full Billy-O like Linford Christie being chased down by an escaped hippo. This will see you careering off ledges, which will require a deft touch, and this will result in Jones either carking it by falling off the bottom of the screen, or you having to climb all the way back to where you were. Gah, awful. The whip too, with its flappy nature, sounds like it should be quite useful and intuitive and fun to use, much like it was in the aforementioned SNES classic Castlevania 4. In this game though, it whiffs its intended target a lot, which is a right pain in the bum when you've got spiky balls coming in to squish Indy before he sired Mutt Williams with Marion Ravenwood. In fact, the hit detection in the game all round is dreadful, with Indy missing shots that he's lined up with. And then there's a bad carryover from Castlevania as well, in the fact that when Indy gets hit, the fellow will recoil back like he's been kicked in the chest by a stallion. This, along with that overly sensitive running control, will put you in all manner of frustrating positions made doubly bad by the fact you've got to reach the end of the level in a strict time limit. If you don't, then well, the Germans are going to have some new toys to play with that will see them win World War I, and it'll all be your fault. Just be better. It's a shame that it's so full of frustrating elements, as there was a lot of work put into this, but I can only really recommend it if you want to be as irritated as you would be by being trapped in a lift with Willie Scott and Short Round from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom for an afternoon. And then Mutt Williams turns up and opens the door to rescue you, only then the door shuts behind him and you end up stuck with Shia LaBeouf as well. Mega reviewed Instruments of Chaos in June 1994, and they seemed as frustrated as I was, giving it a 50%, but summing it up with, no point in buying a game you cannot play. That does sound pretty salty, doesn't it? Sega Pro looked at it in the same month, and they awarded a game an even lower 39%. They said, "This looks and plays like a poor man's Aladdin. The animation is awful, and the levels are just poorly designed. Far too chaotic." So then, all that glitters is not gold. What about that NES game? The Carpenter's Cut of young Indiana Jones titles.
Find out. You have chosen wisely.
Well, this one came out 2 years prior, and was courtesy of Japanese giants Jaleco. Cue the logo. And I'm happy to report that this is so much better. It's pretty hard still, but in a fairer way than its big brother on the Sega machine. I say big brother, but the NES one's older, so I guess the Mega Drive one is fatter and younger. Anyway, Indiana first finds himself in Mexico battling Pancho Villa and his bandits. Once he's taken part in winning that civil war, he uncovers news that a sinister chap has taken possession of an artifact in a mine, and Indy then liberates that as easily as he did those peasants in Mexico. The final 2/3 of the game put Jones in Europe, and indeed in combat fatigues, as he enlists himself in the battle against the Jerrys in World War I. Battling on the front lines and taking down a Big Bertha long-range artillery gun that has been causing issues from a mountaintop are just the first part of his journey. Jones then copies what he does in the Mega Drive game and battles his way to Germany, having a violent train ride there and then taking to the skies in an air battle with the Red Baron. Ooh, different game styles. From there, he has to take out a villainous German commander and his weapon facility, and then get home so Sean Connery can berate him for leaving Wanker's crisp tissues all over his bedroom floor from looking at sexy Renaissance paintings. Big history nerd that he is. The game is a bit of, and I'm quoting Metal Jesus here, a hidden gem. It plays like a cross between Contra and Castlevania, but with a more trial and error approach to proceedings. You won't be finishing the game the first time you play it, unless you're a safe scumming emulating turd like me. The game has a steep learning curve and tricky spots in each level that will leave you laying on the ground counting your teeth the first time you get to them, but once you've got to them again, you'll have no problem as the controls are pretty crisp, and that's a perfectly acceptable level of game design challenge to me. It's occasionally frustrating, but in a good way, rather than the spiteful frustration of Instruments of Chaos and its completely broken structure. Except for the Big Bertha bit in this, that bit made me cuss bad. It is a short game, but it is a good challenge. There are one-hit deaths, but only if you're not in possession of an item or a weapon like Indiana's hat, a torch, knives, whips, his motorbike or guns. Each time the yet-to-be Dr. Jones gets hit, he will lose that item, so you'll be keen to break into another crate and collect a weapon with which to fight the Germans with. Overall, it's a solid platform adventure that's undeniably NES in its design. Graphically, it's nice, with bookending Ninja Gaiden-style cutscenes, crisp late-era Nintendo graphics, and handsome backgrounds. It's got a decent amount of variety to proceedings and remains addictive throughout. Not a great game, but a very, very good, in fact a surprisingly good one. Nintendo Power, though, they didn't really like it when they reviewed it in January 1993. While they praised the action, they thought the controls and graphics were mediocre and didn't do the show justice. Trust me, lads, play the Mega Drive one and get back to me on that. So then, that's the pair of young Indiana Jones games. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is never-ending, seemingly, and now it's desperately stricken by the law of diminishing returns. Marvel's flagship character is, of course, the red and blue arachnid fancier himself that you're currently seeing strutting across the screen. Yes, Spiderman. But he came into that particular movie series pretty late, thanks to a series of complicated rights issues between Disney and Sony. But we weren't short of screen tellings of the web swinger's history despite this, before even Tom Holland's cockney charm and winning youthful smile lit up the screen just prior to the culmination of the Infinity War saga. We had already had Messrs Garfield and Maguire since the turn of the millennium on the silver screen, and countless animated escapades, along with a rather poorly aged pair of live television series from the 70s from either side of the Atlantic. But my favourite version of Spider-Man, including the comic, was always the Fox TV mid-1990s version. You know, the one. Peter Parker looked a bit weird with his side parting, and, well, he wore a polo shirt that wouldn't look out of place on a middle-aged dad day drinker in a flat-roof pub, but only in the summer and only when that young barmaid's in. She wants it, doesn't she? Spider-Man ran from 1994 until 1998, first swinging onto the screens on, and I'm going to say this carefully, Fox Kids in the States, while in the UK we had to sit through Saturday morning light entertainment in the form of Live and Kicking to get our Spider goods for the week. Bog off, Let Loose. Stop singing. I want to see carnage chop people up. Spider-Man was given the green light after the success of fellow Marvel labelmate the X-Men had got on to tremendous success, along with DC's Batman animated series, which was also very good, wasn't it? Yes, it was. The plotline was like a kinetic greatest hits of Spider-Man's 30 years worth of adventures up to that point, introducing every major villain and anti-hero in Spider-Man's pantheon of tales, along with giving all of the major plot lines breathlessly truncated versions, sometimes trying to fit them into 21 minutes of episodic action, but then occasionally realising that wasn't possible and spanning the story over multiple episodes. Interestingly enough, current plotline du jour, that being the multiverse, and more specifically the Spider-Verse, had its screen debut in this series, meaning kids in the 90s were confusingly rotating their heads like baffled dogs about all this multi-dimensional hogwash back then too. Spider-Man was restricted with what it could do thanks to the censorship of the time. Police were armed with lasers instead of pistols. Vampires like Morbius and Blade had to absorb plasma instead of drink blood. And not once did Peter punch a fella in the face, and nor did he hoof him through some breakable glass. He just wasn't allowed. It's true. Go back and watch all 65 episodes. You will not see him punch anyone at all. Incredibly, they couldn't even use the word sinister to describe the Sinister Six. What harm is there in using the word sinister? Does it cause heart attacks in the elderly? Does it? Hang on, I'll test this out. I'll be right back. Yes, it does. Weird, eh? Despite this cripplingly over-the-top nannying, it was appointment telly for comic nerds and had a banger of a theme tune. Although not quite as catchy as that X-Men theme. That was really top quality theme writing, that X-Men theme. So yes, as I said, it lasted 65 episodes, but it wasn't cancelled. It merely ran its course according to producer John Semper Jr. and had a cast that included Mark Hamill, Hank Azaria, Ed Asner, David Warner, Jim Cummings and Jennifer Hale. Plus, in the last series, the mysteriously enigmatic multi-dimensional being, Madam Web, appeared, and she was voiced by Stan's wife, Joan Lee, which is kind of nice and fitting, isn't it? Given the show's success, it should come as no surprise that it had a late-stage 16-bit adaptation on the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive, courtesy of Acclaim, in 1994. It was Spidey's last game by Acclaim, and they'd been pumping them out until that point. We wouldn't see another one for 5 years when Activision took up the reins. While essentially very similar in terms of plotline and structure, the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive games were actually a little bit different when it comes to gameplay and level design. The plotline is fairly simple. Spider-Man's enemies have escaped jail and have decided to club together and give old Webhead all manner of hassle. A who's who of arseholes are after Peter, those being Doc Ock, Shocker, Green Goblin, Mysterio, Venom, Rhino, Lizard, Jack-O-Lantern, the Tinkerer, the Owl, the Beetle, and Alistair Smythe, the owner and wearer of the most magnificent mullet in Marvel history. That's a real Michael Bolton, and I love the flat top. Now, it may sound like a tall order for Spidey to take on these fellas, yes, even the Owl, all at once, but that is exactly what he must do across 6 levels of side-scrolling platform action. Obviously, these evil swine have all manner of evil goons and gadgets at their disposal, so Arachnofella will definitely do over 10k steps on his Apple Watch today, I can tell you that for nothing. Luckily, he's not totally alone, as on occasion members of the Fantastic Four can be called upon as sort of power-ups to offer some much-needed support. A measure of how post-2000 era Spider-Man games are generally how fluidly Spider-Man you feel while playing them. The PlayStation 2018 game and the game based on Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2 are good examples of how good it is when you're as agile and lithe as the high-kicking Spider-Fella, and well, that's not on display here in either version. Yes, these systems are obviously multiple generations advanced on the crusty old 16-bit consoles that we're using here, so they're obviously going to be a little bit more limited technically, but Spider-Man is decidedly lethargic in Spider-Man the Animated Series, not really up for doing whatever a spider can. The levels are small, compact corridors with a bit of verticality, and so Spider-Man spends most of his time jogging slowly about, doing unathletic kicks and punches for the most part, and rarely using his web shooters, which seem a little bit ineffective anyway. There is a bit of web swinging, but it's not intuitive at all and can only be used sparingly. The way he controls is pretty similar to those 2 comic-derived scrolling beat-em-ups Maximum Carnage and Separation Anxiety, but the genre they were in sort of demands that Spider-Man is a bit more confined to the ground, but in those he at least has a little speed in his general assaults on the goons that are in front of him. Sega's Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, a platformer released half a decade before this, featured a far more energetic Spider-Man climbing and swinging hither and dither to all manner of surfaces, and so should be viewed as a more apt comparison. And well, in that instance, Spider-Man the Animated Series is a bit miserable. This is one basic bitch to play. Level design isn't brilliant either, sometimes very frustrating to steer about due to how they are laid out. It's not always obvious what walls Spidey can stick to, or even what he can just simply stand on, and there are doorways and trapdoors that are easy to miss. Similarly, the web swinging can only be done on certain surfaces, meaning you'll often be baffled on what to do next using a character not normally thwarted by obstacles at all. You should just be able to climb or swing right over them, right? This is something Spider-Man vs. Kingpin didn't suffer from, and that's why that game is the best Spider-Man game of this era. Despite this, if you separate the character of Spider-Man from the game itself, if you were to say just be controlling a generic fella, or even Captain America say, I think it would improve the experience. I don't think it would be a brilliant platform game, but it would be passable. It's just not a good Spider-Man game. It's a challenge to get through it, not just because of the poor level design, but because it's a long and tough game, and so you'll get a good workout from it. And you know what? I've got a real soft spot for the after-game summations of the characters' later activities, as they are pretty funny. I mean, Rhino gets violated by a real rhino in a zoo, something you probably wouldn't have seen in the Saturday morning cartoon. Graphically, it's perfectly fine. The representations of the villains are instantly recognisable. However, old Parker himself looks a little bit short and dumpy, if we're being honest, in the Super Nintendo game. The levels are okay, I guess. The first level is a pretty bland mechanical factory or whatever it's supposed to be, but it does improve later on. Mysterio's level is in a theme park, and well, that's quite an interesting thing to move about in. So the games are slightly different from each other, and if I was to pick my favourite from the two, it's probably going to be the Mega Drive one, with its 3 buttons being a bit more contextual than the finger-twisting Super Nintendo version, and the levels themselves are a bit more compact and direct in the Mega Drive one. It's showing less ambition, but it's doing it better. It also runs ever so slightly smoother, so mark this as a win for Sega today. As the Spider-Man game of the era, it is better than Arcade's Revenge for sure, but it's no Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. It's not an amazing Spider-Man, it's not a spectacular Spider-Man. It's probably the middling Spider-Man. I won't say go out of your way to play it, but I won't say don't play it. It's fine, it's an average game. GamePro reviewed both games in the same issue. The Mega Drive version got a 3.5 out of 5. They said Spider fans and action-adventure fans will agree. You can't keep a good spider down. They gave the Super Nintendo game the exact same score of 3.5 and said this game could be a good way to spend time between issues. Some things, they just pass you by. It is inevitable, especially as you get older. All the Kardashians for me are some sort of gestalt entity with like a mothership firing out clones of itself. Now, I've probably heard a Drake song, but I wouldn't actually be able to identify one for you. Some things, though, they really shouldn't pass you by because of age, because it turns out they've been around your whole life, longer than your life. I'm pretty sure a lot of us will remember that Prince Valiant was a short-lived cartoon, and it is indeed what this video is about. It's about the game based on the cartoon. But did you know it was a comic strip originally penned in 1937 and that it's still going to this day? What? Right? When did this happen? Anyway, it had a TV show which had an NES game. That is what you're pointing your silly face at right now, unless you're already looking at your phone or something already. That's just plain rude. So, Prince Valiant, as I've just talked about, is a comic strip, originally launched in the late 1930s. It was first published in the New Orleans Times, but found its way across the world's tabloids over the next few decades. Prince Valiant was the creation of Harold Rudolph Foster, an illustrator who cut his teeth on comic strips based on Tarzan in the 1920s. Prince Valiant tells the story of the young Nordic Prince Val, who leaves his homeland of Thule in the 400s to attend the court of Camelot. You know, good old King Arthur, Merlin, Lancelot, and that gang of made-up goofs. Certain historical events play into the narrative, such as the conquering antics of one Attila the Hun and the 455 sacking of Rome. That's 455 the year, not the time it happened. Although, having said that, its grip on history was a touch sketchy in other aspects. For instance, Prince Valiant travels the world, discovering America a good 1,000 years before Columbus. Columbus, you hack! The animation Legend of Prince Valiant arrived in 1991, giving the titular hero a mullet that somehow made him look a bit like peak era Vernon Kay. It ran for 65 22-minute episodes, courtesy of King Features, who also did Defenders of the Earth. I'm not a particular fan of King Features, as they're a bit of a nemesis to me, as I had to hack my Spectrum games based on TV shows video on Defenders of the Earth because the bastards blocked it worldwide. Flash Gordon would not approve, you fucks. A few liberties are taken with the original comic. Not that that comic took a few liberties with Arthurian legend, so what's good for the goose is equally good for the mulleted Scandinavian swordsmith. Valiant teams up on a series of adventures with Rowan, the bow-totting blacksmith's daughter, and wandering peasant, and Pavel Nedved lookalike Arn, as they seek to put an end to the villainy of Mordred, King Cynan, Lady Morgana, and Dylan.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
Prince Valiant wasn't afraid of the celebrity voice working circuit, with Uncle Phil Stroke Shredder himself, James Avery, dear old Tim Curry, and Skeletor voice actor Alan Oppenheimer in the main cast, and guest voices of the calibre of Michael York, Jonathan Rhys-Davies, Will Wheaton, Sean Astin, Patty Duke and David Warner making an appearance or two when required. Truly, though, the most impressive thing, and probably most memorable thing about the whole show, was its theme tune, a proper early 90s MOR banger beloved by Larry Bundy Jr., which has aged like milk, really, in terms of modern music, but it was an extremely professional and well put together piece of music. Clearly this show was told it was ending some way during production of the second series, with a few storylines either left dangling or massively hurried up towards the end. A shame, but such is the ruthless nature of early 90s syndicated American animation. There are 2 games published courtesy of British software house legends Ocean on the NES and the Game Boy, exclusive for us in Europe. Aren't we lucky? Well, I say exclusive, but the Game Boy title did come out the same year, with a quick license removal and a reskinned name of Kingdom Crusade, thanks to publishing company Electro Brain. And you know what? Nothing is sacred, because in 2019, Pico Interactive secured the rights to release the NES version in America. Boo! This time it's Lancelot taking the lead role in Little Lancelot. Damn you! Can't we have this one thing to ourselves? It's not like the NES was popular over here or anything. Just let her have her own European title. The games are very different to each other, and let's first have a look at the game on the old lunchbox you had underneath your telly first. Naturally, you are Prince Valiant, and you must locate Tintagel, as this is but the start of the nobleman's journey. And being Cornwall, it's time to wade through swamps while being attacked by the locals. As you can tell, we're not looking at an exact recreation of the show's aesthetic here. This is no Aladdin on the Genesis, or to give it a more fair and just comparison, it's no DuckTales or Bucky O'Hare or Darkwing Duck either. It's not a looker, and that doesn't change throughout the course of the game. I mean, what is Prince Valiant throwing here? Saucepan lids? Any idea? Answer down below, or at least theorise in the comments. Best answer wins Tajikistan. Genuinely. Go there on a plane and tell them that you won. You'll be king there, I'm telling you. The first level is straightforward enough. It's left to right stuff, with the only real issue being how quickly the stepping stones sink. Boy, they go quick. How come they keep going up and down? That's not how stepping stones work. Game logic. Perfect timing is required, and that is something you'll definitely need later on in the game. You will encounter various dragons and beasts along with cutthroats, and then it's on to level 2 and a crossbow-based shoot-'em-up in the style of Operation Wolf. Some adversaries will drop power-ups to see you through to the next scene. It's fairly responsive, it's not particularly stunning, but it's a bit of variety, and you can't complain about that. Valiant finds a big mine filled with traps of the booby variety placed there by Vikings. My, it's all very Curse of Oak Island, isn't it? The game becomes a lot more platformy here, with Valiant going through a maze-like catacomb, dodging snakes, logs, bees and buzzsaws while whacking targets to open doors, battling ghosts and bears and avoiding falling masonry like he's in a 2023 British school. This is where the challenge intensifies. It's a long level, dripping in one-hit deaths on every screen. This bit is difficult with a D big enough to satisfy Sasha Grey. That's a pretty big D. From here we take to the high seas, which means I was wrong earlier and Valiant must have been in Thule, or Norway, at the beginning of the game. My apologies to the people of Cornwall. I have suggested that your area is covered in swampland. Enemy ships are determined to see the Prince's vessel full of more holes than a 55-year-old virgin man's pants. You can rotate between the cannons on your ship's flank to take on the aggressive seafarers. It's a lot like the crossbow game, only you have to pitch the cannons to take down your foes, and this level is good, clean beachhead style fun, but on your NES instead. The final level has His Royal Highness arriving in Camelot, where he is immediately taken as a threat and thrown in the dungeon. To prove his innocence, Valiant escapes and murders nearly everyone in the fabled keep. That'll go down well. It's another trap-laden maze level, but strangely not as laden with those there traps as the third level. It is a little bit longer though, and it's very easy to get lost in. You'll encounter knights, bowmen, a helpful Merlin, and eventually you'll end the game by bending the knee to King Arthur. King Arthur is impressed that you've killed most of his staff, and he puts you on a YTS scheme to be a Knight of the Round Table. And that's that. Prince Valiant on the NES is a game. Yes. It's overall pretty mediocre, but not offensive in any way, really. It's deeply frustrating at times, but it is mildly compulsive to play for a little while, even despite its murky, poor graphics. It is as underwhelming as the ending of its story. That distance just to kneel in front of a king. Brilliant. Ocean weren't the swaggering juggernaut of their 8-bit computer heyday at this point, but they still had the odd great game in them. You know, like the Addams Family series. But this isn't that. This is a fairly average NES game. Enforce reviewed it in the Christmas issue of 1992 and said it was an interesting game with average graphics and tough gameplay. They enjoyed the challenging and innovative combination of game styles. They said, however, the poor graphics are too frustrating to give the game long lastability. In the end, they gave it a score of 67%. Moving on to the Game Boy title, and for me, it's the better Prince Valiant game of the two. You're now a young adult Valiant with a fair amount of knightly experience and a command of Arthur's army. The tyrant Cynan is determined to take over Cornwall so he can fence off all the decent surfing areas, and Arthur thinks that he's had quite enough of these tourists taking over his beaches. Thank you very much. We're not in platformer territory here at all. Oh no, you start the game on a large grid. On that grid you have your kingdom in your chosen shade of Game Boy hued glumness, and your opponent's advancing army is in another shade of Game Boy hued glumness. Each square has different terrain and may depict castles or infantry. You will see your opponent move their characters into your territory, turning it into their shade of Game Boy hued glumness. You must select which of your army, usually the one closest to whatever objective you want to indulge in, to move. As soon as you click on a character, you can then move that character about in the environment in real time, with each flip screen representing one of the tiles on the battlefield board. You can find various power-ups in those battlefields to help power you up for your next battle or to help you heal from the previous one. Move to the next battlefield and that's the next square. If you're on a opponent's square when you walk through, then that becomes your territory. If you walk onto a screen an enemy is on at the same time as you are, well, it's time for a real rum-do. The different infantry attack in different ways, with wizards using ranged magic, Valiant using his sword, and the giant throwing rocks and swinging around his big old chain. Once you're out of the battle, you can then tap the start key and switch to another soldier, and then move him or her onto an enemy. There are two ways to win, either by wiping out all the enemies on the map, or by conquering their castles, by capturing all the tiles around each one of those castles. This can be played at several difficulty levels, selectable map sizes, and it also has a 2-player mode, which actually must be a bit of a hoot. It's sort of a simplified medieval Star Wars Battlefront 2. And you know what? I quite like it. It's a cool concept, especially for a fairly throwaway cartoon show from the early 90s. I mean, perhaps it hasn't got a lot of longevity once you've played it through a few times. But for me, on my very brief playthrough, it's a valiant effort. Yeah, it probably deserved a better pun than that. Enforce, which always sounded to me like a 70s blaxploitation film about soldiers of fortune, happened to review the Game Boy Prince Valiant on the very same page as its NES brother. That saves on the graphics, doesn't it? They gave it, rightly, a higher score of 71% and said fans of the cartoon show should approve of this handheld version. There's lots to see and do, and some great sequences. So, Arthur, this video, was about a really good game, but there wasn't Lance a lot wrong with the other title, to be fair. I just like the handheld Game-A-Lot more. Game-A-Lot, Camelot. God, that didn't work. Ouch. Cats, they're funny things, aren't they? All that purring, that meowing, the loud brawls at 2 a.m, louder sex at 3 a.m, and of course, licking their anus. Not to mention being all cyborgy and trying to curb the ambitions of a villainous character called the Big Cheese and his lot to become the Emperor of Little Tokyo by using martial arts and futuristic weaponry. What, your cat doesn't do that? Well, bin that bugger like that woman we've all forgotten about from about 10 years ago. And get this is Samurai Pizza Cats. Now, Samurai Pizza Cats, who are they? Well, that information begins right about now. As you can tell from both the title of the game and the very anime visual, Samurai Pizza Cats can find its origins in the land of the rising sun. The show Kyato Ninden Taiyandi ran from February 1990 to the same month the very next year. Saban Entertainment bought it over to the United States and then they adapted the series into a 52-episode series. But just like they did with the Kamen Rider aka Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, it wasn't a straight-up redubbed version of Kyato Ninden Taiyandi. This was instead completely rewritten from its Japanese source material, from the ground up. Emma Thompson's dad did a similar thing with the Magic Roundabout from its original French animation. It was given a more comedic, wackier bent to it than the original, but it still kept the basic conceit. The theme for Samurai Pizza Cats played up to several cultural references, throwing shade at the Ninja Turtles at one point. Don't you go throwing shade at the reason why you're probably over here, what with being anthropomorphic hero ninja creatures. It was also sung a little bit like Pee Wee Herman. Who do you call when you want some pepperoni? Very weird. The plotline features the machinations of the overreaching rat PM of Little Tokyo, the Big Cheese. And you know what? He needs to be stopped. He's aiming to put one over the doddering Emperor Fred for his own criminal ends. Princess Violet, the Emperor's daughter, is actually the one who's sort of in charge of the country at the moment. And when she figures out what this sneaky rat fella is up to, she enlists a palace guard commander called Big Al to form a group assigned to stopping this clandestine tomfoolery that will only end up making it look like a right shithole like Crawley or Basildon. The three heroes, Speedy Cerviche, Guido Anchovy and Polyester, were they collectively known as the Samurai Pizza Cats. Why? They are cyborg samurai who work part-time in a pizzeria. And they're cats. Samurai Pizza Cats has been broadcast in 33 different countries across the world, with the UK having it shown on ITV. The American version of Samurai Pizza Cats has become an enduring cult hit with anime fans for its knockabout silly nature. It was reasonably popular in most Western countries, which is why it's a bit of a surprise that there was no interest from Tecmo in adapting their 1991 Famicom title Kyato Ninden Taiyandi to the NES. While, yes, this was a transitional period where NES owners were trading in their consoles for the newer Super Nintendo or maybe even a Genesis, it was still a period when there were a lot of these consoles in homes, and it was a big kids license at the time. And spoilers, it's a really, really decent game. So yes, it is disappointing that this didn't leave Nipponese shores. But thanks to the internet, we all now get to play it. Not legally, but screw you guys, powers that be. You should have given us it back in 1991 or 2. Not only that, but creative, clever nerds have adapted the script to match that of the silliness of Samurai Pizza Cats and put it in English too. You lovely buggers, nerds, keep doing what you do. Have a look online and you'll find the translated version soon enough. It's illegal, but you'll be in for a hoot. Tecmo, a great third-party company in the days of the NES, had fine heritage with the platform genre, as anyone who's played a Ninja Gaiden game can tell you. And of course, because it's an NES license game, it's of course a platformer because it's the NES. What did you think it was going to be? The Ninja Cats are called into action when the Big Cheese makes another big move of overthrowing Little Tokyo, this time with the help of a mysterious scientist, Dr. Purple, who is secretly making him some deadly machines. Uh-oh. Is Dr. Purple going to finally weigh the scales in the favour of the Big Cheese and put him in the Emperor's throne? Not if you can do anything about it. After you've selected your desired stage, each level begins with you then selecting one of the three main characters. Largely they're pretty much the same, with slight differences in terms of weapon range and speed. They also have special abilities that each have 3 power levels that you can top up by collecting power-ups, and these will drain your Ninpo magic meter when you use them. These special abilities will act a bit like the magic in like a Shinobi or Ninja Gaiden game. Sooner or later you'll run up to a literal brick wall though, or some such anyway, that none of our 3 heroes can bypass. At this point, you'll call in a specific character from the rescue team, who each have their own abilities like breaking rocks, swimming, short flight or digging. Upon selecting one of these characters, you will temporarily change into them for a brief period, and each use of their ability will drain this help meter here. And look, household pets as a rescue team using their abilities to help out their brothers. It's a bit Paw Patrol, isn't it? Did Paw Patrol nick their idea off of Samurai Pizza Cats with the rescue team? Damn those dogs, always copying ideas and absorbing all the attention from poor old cats. Rescue team, you should have took advantage while you could. There's so much money in that Paw Patrol thing. They've got like multiple films and what have you. Although probably they both nicked the idea of Thunderbirds, I don't know. Anyway, the rescue team open up whole new areas for you to explore and more than double the playable roster of characters, and they can be called in at any time, provided you've got the juice in the old helpometer. Once it expires, the character you chose at the start will wake up from napping on the radiator and replace the rescue team member. After a while, that bar will replenish again during gameplay and you can call them in again. Due to the amount that you'll need them later on in the game, it's rarely empty for too long. It really opens up the game using the abilities of the rescue team, giving you multiple routes to the boss villains in each of the levels, thus increasing replayability. And my word, will that replaying be a thing you will be doing, as this game is truly one of the best game licenses that I've covered in 5 years. It is up there with G.I. Joe, Die Hard, Batman, New Ghostbusters 2, Bucky O'Hare and Gremlins 2 as one of the very, very, very best NES licensed games. It has been an absolute pleasure to play up there with Mega Man 2 or the Tecmo Company's own Ninja Gaiden in terms of its gameplay. It's a late stage NES platformer, which of course is when we got some really system pushing excellence like Little Samson and Kirby. I mean, just look at those graphics. What a beautiful NES title it is. If I saw it on the street, I'd go pss, 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 and hope it came over for a stroke. The world is colourful and diverse in its look. Parallax scrolling is used in abundance, and it features some really big and very well drawn large enemy sprites that lurk within the confines of the world. Animation is pretty decent too, and to me it's a game that wouldn't look massively out of place on the SNES or the Mega Drive, albeit maybe requiring a brush up on those washed out NES colours. It's a really, really good looking game. It plays really well as well. It's such an addictive little title, taking elements from all the best platformers up until that point that were on the system. Surprisingly, its biggest stumbling point perhaps is the exact opposite of what hampered Tecmo's most famous NES series: difficulty. Whereas Ninja Gaiden was extraordinarily punishing, Samurai Pizza Cats feels at times like it's a complete cruise, as leisurely as a cat sleeping on a shed roof at the height of summer. Health power-ups aren't quite as plentiful as Mega Man, say, but they're abundant enough, and it's only in the game's later levels that you'll be really struggling to finish them when the difficulty level ramps up significantly. But for me, this is a huge surprise, as obviously it was a game that I hadn't played before due to its Asia-only original release. God bless the internet, especially what with the English translation being just a few clicks away. Samurai Pizza Cats, or Kyatyo Ninden Tayandi, whatever you want to call it. It's an absolute gem, and you should yo-ho-ho pirate this as soon as humanly possible. A tremendous platformer, instantly installed in my top 10 favourite NES games, and you know what? That's completely free of nostalgia goggles, as I'd never played it before. Due to its Japanese-only release, I've got no reviews from the time, so let's just ask this cat what he thinks about it. I hate time. It dominates all of our time, all the time, and apparently our sentences too. I've used the word time 3 times already. In fact, I've just used it an additional 2 times, and there's another. And just me mentioning it is a waste of your time and my time. I hate it. Bloody man-made concept, time. There's too much of it, and simultaneously not a lot of it. It just needs to stop. If I was Zach Morris, that superpowered being from Saved by the Bell, I'd freeze time and just never unfreeze it. And here we have a game with time in the title, with a protagonist in it who travels through time. So already this game is on for a downer with me. But is it bad? Well, hold your chronological horses, son, because I'm going to waste even more of your time by telling you about the TV show that this game is based on. Time Trax was a 1993 sci-fi television series that ran for 2 series. It was produced by a combination of Warner Brothers, Laura Mar Television and Gary Nardino Productions, and was shown on primetime in the States and ITV in the UK. Experienced sci-fi collaborators Harve Bennett, Jeffrey K. Hayes and Grant Rosenberg created the series between them, with most of the filming taking place in Queensland, Australia, which stood in for Washington, DC. Why? Because Washington was feeling under the weather and couldn't make it to the studio that day. I don't know. The premise of the show is remarkably similar to that of the movie Time Cop, but this was released before Time Cop, before Jean-Claude Van Damme says anything, so shut it, mate. It is the year 2193, not now, but in the show, before you start fretting that you slept in and you're late for work and the funerals of your entire family and friendship group. Darian Lambert is a detective who is sent back in time to the year 1993, to a parallel universe, which just so happens to be our universe, to apprehend as many runaway wrong-uns as humanly possible. Good, cheers Darian, that's much appreciated, thanks. He gets here by using a device called the Trax, which just so happens to be the name of this franchise, Time Trax. Well, I never. Darian carries with him an advanced computer called Selma, a credit card-sized computer that interacts with our hero in the form of a hologrammatic lady, and he carries with him also a small weapon that stuns his quarry. Captain Darian Lambert is portrayed by Dale Midkiff, who is perhaps most famous as the lead in the original movie adaptation of Pet Sematary, with the Selma role taken by Australian actress Elizabeth Alexander, who was also in a Stephen King adaptation, that being the TV 2-parter Salem's Lot. Oh, and Home and Away, which wasn't written by Stephen King, and if it was, he wouldn't have set it in Australia, he'd have set it in bloody Maine, like he always does. The top 5 critics who reviewed the show gave it an aggregate score of 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, which might explain how it didn't progress beyond 1994. In terms of proving itself, it ran out of time. Haha. The game was produced and released by Malibu Games in April 1994 between the first and second series. We've covered one of their games before, that being the fellow 90s sci-fi television show Seaquest DSV. This one has a bit less seawater in it, but not zero seawater, but we'll come back to that in a bit. What's worth noting is while this was a Super Nintendo exclusive, it was also planned to be released on the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, depending on how you want to say it. This version was dropped when GameTech acquired the company, but we eventually got the ROM of it in 2013 when a lovely employee of the time released it onto the internet. It's largely similar in design, but is most notable for its sound, which is different from the Super Nintendo version. It used an advanced sound driver designed by Dean Belfield, which was never used before or after. The music on this version was composed by industry legend Tim Follin, responsible for the absolute bangers on Rock and Roll Racing, Nez Silver Surfer and Solstice. In this action platformer, you're tasked with putting yourselves in the shoes of Darien, which will make you feel like a stupid, unfit blob of wasted potential should you sit there and watch the lengthy intro sequence. It spends the duration telling you how superhuman this dude is, while using a tone that indicates actually it's no big deal and he's bang average in 2193. Shut up, Time Trax. In the game, Darien's mission is to capture a neo-Nazi called Sepp Dietrich, who sounds suitably Hitlery by that name. If you can capture or eradicate him, then maybe you'll be able to bring down the villainous Mordecai Samby, who's the scientist scumbag who keeps sending all the dodgy fugitives back to 1993. Now, they'll suffer in some ways. After all, 1993 was the year that Wigfield was in the charts and Darling Buds of May was still on the telly. But I didn't commit any future racism crimes, and I had to suffer those too, so they can bugger off and get some 2193 justice on top of those horrors. Thank you very much. Lambert's mission will take him from the future to the 1993 Smithsonian Museum and the rough foliage of the Hawaiian jungles, with a couple of vehicle-based set pieces varying up the action in the platforming. The first thing that strikes me as I embarked on this time-travelling venture is how much it feels and looks like a Western Super Nintendo action platformer. If it wasn't the fact that it's in the Malibu logo on the title screen, I would have banked on this being an ocean cut from this era. Now, normally with me, I like a ocean game, but what was fantastic on the ZX Spectrum isn't so great when being displayed on Nintendo's 16-bit machine. Yes, ocean on the 16 bits usually meant a bad time was going to be had. The action is standard fare for a Western platformer in many respects. There are a warehouse, a jungle and a building site level which has verticality, as generic as they come these. There are regenerating goons and traps like spikes and proximity detonators everywhere. But the standard things it does very, very well, mostly. Our hero has a few tricks up his sleeve. He's got his palm-sized villain zapper for the duration of the game, but he's also very handy with his fists and feet, which are context-based depending on your stance from your enemy. You can even hoof people while swinging on a pipe or when you're hanging on a ladder. Sometimes the old blaster won't have an effect on the guards and the technological swines that impinge your progress, so you'll have to scuff up your new trainers on their chins. Darien also has the ability to slow down time, which to a casual observer will just look like the Super NES is doing its usual thing that it does, which is to struggle when there's 3 sprites on the screen. But it's not that. In this, it's a feature. This will help you in your combat as you can get some free shots in, and it regenerates pretty quickly. But overall, its use is pretty negligible for the most part. You can go through the whole game without using it at all, which just shows you how pointless it is. Still, it's neat to have bullet time in a Super Nintendo game. Intentional bullet time at that. There are lettered power-ups that might extend your life bar if you get them all, but dare you risk collecting them when there's a trap and an enemy in between you and they. Probably the best parts of the game are the two vehicle base levels, one on a bike and one on a Sea-Doo, or jet ski if you prefer to use the brand name. In these you'll be taking on airbound vehicles that very much want you to not take their neo-Nazi boss back to his own time. These are pretty good fun, and they reminded me a lot of the motorbike section from Sly Spy. Weirdly, these are the only part of the game where you can pick up power-ups for your gun, which is very odd for a game like this. Probably the best bit of the game, though these bosses are absolute bullet sponges, demanding you hit every single inch of their floor-facing surfaces before they're destroyed. This can take ages and be very frustrating, as can a lot of the platforming sections of the game. The movement of Lambert may look fluid, but he doesn't always grab hold of the overhanging pipes and you'll end up with a spike up the exit-only part of your anatomy. There are times when you really should be able to shoot in directions other than directly left or right, but you cannot. Additionally, there are some traps like the falling masonry on certain levels and different explosives which seem pretty much unavoidable at times when you leap into the air to their platform. And as health-giving burgers are thin on the ground, you'll struggle to make a great deal of progress. Enemies will respawn within a couple of seconds of you eradicating them. Give me a bit of a rest, fellas. There's a good chap. I've only been able to share footage from the entire game by utilising action replay codes. Otherwise you'd be looking at a lot of video from the first and second level. I'm sure there are skilled players who get deep into this game without using action replay codes, but I'm known to be largely useless and will cheat my way to any shortcuts. So, should you make the trip through time and play Time Trax? Maybe. It's got good presentation for a Western platformer with smooth animation and a few swish uses of Mode 7. It will give you a decent challenge, but as I previously mentioned, perhaps not in the right way. When games like Contra 3 and Castlevania 4 exist on the same format and came out years before, why would you bother with Time Trax? CMVG gave it a lofty 89% in their July 1994 edition. They said it's challenging, absorbing and lots of fun to play. One of the best platform beat-em-ups on the SNES. GamePro also gave it high praise in April of the same year. They said, this action platform game tests your shooting eye and serves up loads of hidden bonuses to keep you digging. A 90% from them. They've both been very generous indeed. It's at best a 7 out of 10 from me. I don't feel I've wasted my time with it, but I hope you feel that you've not wasted your time by watching this video. If you do, sometimes you've got to ask the big questions, such as, no. Well, I have a son called William, so a tick there. Skill? I'm alright at Pipe Mania and Rampart, but nothing actually practical. I'm in my late 40s. I can't hang very long from overhead bars. I get lactic acid build, which really comes along very quickly. How do you mean? It beats super quickly because I eat too many pies, so it would win a BPM race for sure. I didn't say it was, but duly noted. Honestly, no, I haven't ever fed a Christian to a lion or held a trident. Thanks for asking though. I do get awful lonely, so it's nice that people take an interest in what I've got to say for myself. Yes, here is the multi-format American Gladiators game released on MS-DOS, Amiga, Mega Drive, Super NES and plain old NES, which spread its lycra of releases over the musculature of 3 years between 1991 to 1993. Giant cotton buds, hamster balls and all. Because sadly, we didn't get a UK Gladiators game, perhaps because it arrived a couple of years too late to get an Ocean full-price game or even an alternative budget title on the ZX Spectrum. So we're stuck covering the American variant. but it's not massively dissimilar in its events or structure. However, I will give a brief overview of the whole gladiatorial franchise, with perhaps a scintilla more favouritism to the UK one because, well, Jet. Always Jet. American Gladiators was an early evening competition that began in 1989 that pitted 2 men and 2 women against each other and a horde of supremely athletic gentlemen and women that would alternate across events and episodes. Those people were the eponymous Gladiators. The winner from each sex would go on to the next round over the course of a knockout-style competition that lasted 12 thrill-packed episodes. Each episode consisted of 6 to 8 events where the contenders would pit their physicality against that of the lean, mean, zero body fat machines in red, white and blue singlets. It was a mixture of grueling events that would test the mettle of even the most hardy of souls without a big old unit getting up in your grill as well. It was a big hit, no doubt helped by having as big a bombastic approach to the whole shebang as the Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior led era of the WWF at the time. With such a huge hit doing gangbusters in the States, eager television producers the world over were keen for a slice of this pie, along with no doubt a large subsection of the country's gym bunnies who fancied their shot at being a gladiator. So the gladiatorial tendril spread to 10 territories, including, of course, the UK. Gladiators, shorn of its Yank prefix, started in the UK on ITV in 1992 and ran until the year 2000, which means it outlasted its American counterpart by a whole year. It was initially presented by Ori KKK Johnson and retired footballer John Fashanu. It was full of Americana glitz and glamour, with striped-shirted referee John Anderson, lights, fireworks, a cheesy as F rock theme tune written by the hilariously named Muff Mervyn, not to mention that most American of things, cheerleaders. You know, girls with pom-poms doing the splits on UK television. It's too much Americana. Mother, pass the teapot, I need to re-anglicise myself. In keeping with its American counterparts, we had short jock names for the gladiators that absolutely stank of sweat and goddamn power. You had Cobra, Hunter, Saracen, Trojan. You can hear those names flex and steal your girlfriend and shove you in a bin as you walk past them in the schoolyard. Those are men's men. The most notorious of these was Wolf, a snarling middle-aged grump, who a few 8-bit computer users gave a knowing wink to each other about, what with him being the frontman of Barbarian's advertising. The ones that weren't looking at Maria Whittaker and her huge jugs, of course. Then we had the ladies, who had mysterious lady warrior names such as Zodiac and Vogue and Panther. And of course, Jet. My dearest Jet. So much blood rushed into so many groins UK-wide when Jet appeared on the television. I'm going to swoon. Ouch. It would be churlish of me, of course, not to mention the greatest joke ever written to Viz's letterbox page. They say lightning doesn't strike twice. Well, she caught me sniffing her leotard in the dressing room on Gladiators and kicked me twice in the bollocks. That is a joke work of art. But no television format is forever, and as time goes on, interest wanes, and as previously stated, Gladiators ran out its welcome and left our screens in the year 2000. A brief comeback occurred in 2009 on Sky One, presented by Ian Wright and the late Caroline Flack, but it didn't really have the pull of the first series, and so it turned off its travelator after just 2 series. Gladiators' second run is probably most notable for launching the sports entertainment career of one Nick Aldis, who is now a decorated multi-time wrestling champion across the pond and was recently turned up in a very prominent position in the WWE. Like a baby-oiled littlest hobo, though, Gladiators has turned up once again at a different door of yet another television channel in 2024, this time the BBC, with a new cast of gladiators that look like walnuts poured into condoms and presented by Bradley Walsh and his Nepo baby, the first episode seemed to see the show strike a chord with its new audience in its head-to-head with ITV's very popular Masked Singer, with 6 million people tuning in. Will it keep up that success? Will our love of fat-free muscle men bullying Joe Public continue to captivate UK audiences? Probably not. No, people lose interest in a couple of weeks, I reckon. We'll see. American Gladiators the game was a multi-event sports title published by GameTech. GameTech started in 1987 and they released a lot of game show related properties with Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Double Dare, Family Feud and Hollywood Squares among their cadre of titles. American Gladiators features 7 of the featured events from the television show: Joust, Wall, Powerball, Atmosphere, Assault and the romantically titled Human Cannonball, with everything culminating in the digit-despising Eliminator. Joust is of course the iconic hit people with giant cotton buds game, but you've got to pretend that our opponent is a hateful lump of huge earwax in order to survive your platform-bound duel. It is a rudimentary boxing-style challenge as you attempt to dwindle the gladiator's health bar while he attempts to do the same to you. In most of the versions you'll be playing a game that feels a lot like a less mobile version of Barbarian. Ironic considering Wolf's involvement. It's very clunky if truth be told. You have to combine buttons and directions. Obviously this works much better on the console versions due to the amount of buttons. Now the NES one is where you start to suspect something is a bit different about their interpretation of the Gladiators, as rather than being a simulation of the show, it's more of a combative beat-em-up, as you leap from plinth to plinth, hitting gladiators asunder. If you're familiar with AVGN, you'll know of this blood-curdling death scream. And yes, I have to play it because it's amazing. The NES one though, is just as clunky as its 16-bit counterparts. The wall will have you trying to bound up a flat vertical surface like a spider on trapped fly delivery day, while your muscle-bound adversary does the same, but usually better. You're both being chased by gladiators, so you had best dash up the ziggurat lickety-split. You don't want to be pulled off by a giant sweaty man, do you? It's deeply infuriating until you get how the buttons work. The NES one is very different. The wall is huge and full of obstacles, and other wall levels, because it does change up, there are gladiators coming down towards you in their legions, so you have to go round them. They're like muscle-bound rain. The NES game then, once again, ignoring reality in favour of something more spectacular. God bless it. Human Cannonball has you leap onto a rope and then throw yourself at a shredded gladiator who is carrying a shield with the aim to knock the git to the ground. This one is all about the timing as you trying to jump on the rope and then fling yourself at the gladiator, so it might be better for people that have played something like Pilot Wings or even a golf game. Once you get the timing down, all challenge is gone from this mode. All of these are viewed side on, apart from the Super Nintendo version, which tries to do it a little bit more flashy and use a first person perspective and a bit of the old Mode 7 as well. It still plays roughly the same though. Atmosphere has you in a giant hamster ball, or as I like to think about it, because I don't think anyone really thinks about these little things these days, is those little balls you had to pour like liquid in and put them in your washing machine before they became dissolving capsules. See, now you're thinking about them and how early 90s they are. Good old nostalgia. That's what we're all here for. Anyway, you and your opponent are playing at the same time in the same arena. Your objective is to roll over the little raised golf holes to get points, with your opponent trying to do the same. The gladiators are trying to stop that kind of nonsense, and all this in a strict and tough time limit. The physics in this are reflective of the real life version, in the fact that you have inertia that carries you forward, and then you have to sort of counteract it if you want to run in the other direction. Is it fun? Not really. It's probably the worst game out of the collection. The NES one is afraid of confined spaces and so decides not to include Atmosphere as one of its games. It's probably wise. Powerball casts you in your dream role as that logo of a man putting stuff in a bin, like you used to get on the back of a crisp packet. Only it's the high octane version of the logo of a man putting stuff in a bin, like you get on the back of the crisp packet, and you've got a bunch of 6'5" bullies trying to stop you, and instead of like rubbish, you've got balls that you've got put in a bin, and they're not really bins. Sorry, I'm not really good at analogies. This resembles Atmosphere in game, with both players that are involved playing simultaneously, trying to put these balls into the holes, and for once all of the versions are the same. It's probably the most playable of all the events, even if it is a decidedly Z-tier version of Speedball 2. Assault is basically posh Nerf against a powerlifter jock with his nips out. Can you score more hits than your rival? I think you can. I have absolute faith in you. You start off in a top-down perspective, dodging pellets shot by a gladiator, and you must rapidly duck behind a wall and pick up a beanbag bazooka, and you switch to third person as you try to shoot your adversary. Easier said than done, and you only get one shot at it. So if you miss, you have to dash to the next launcher. Keep going, and you'll spy the exit, and you can call an end to this needless, silly violence. The NES one does its own thing again with a bizarre vertical shooter. I don't know, this event just seems a bit ill thought out. Again, not really a fan of it. Finally, we have the Eliminator, the show culminating event where the contestants are released at different times according to how many points they've accrued in the previous proceedings. This is the one with the Travelator vertical conveyor belt, which is what I call the moving floor when you get to the boarding gate in an airport. You know, it's the Travelator, isn't it? What is its actual name? Does anyone know? Can you put it in the comments below, please? It is a grueling assault course made up of obstacles that your dad reckoned he could do easily, but he definitely couldn't, especially now. I love the determined walk, though, of the competitors here, like a determined Karen observing a passing retail manager about to give him a bit of their mind. It's not brilliant, this section, and what could have been really exciting and a cool and varied, more skilled version of track and field with a lot of mixing up, it doesn't really work out at all. It's a messy, unfulfilling experience. And that is indicative of the game as a whole, really. This gave Game Tech a chance to stretch their game show legs with a bit of action, but that action, it's not up to snuff at all. None of the events stand out in any way whatsoever, and it's a bit naff that you can't do the event separately from like the menu screen. I mean, even in 2 players, it feels like a missed opportunity, that. It's bland, initially infuriating, and overall pretty joyless. The NES one, I think, just shades it over the others by not being as steadfastly stoic to the source material. But that praise is like saying it's the most handsome dog in a pug beauty contest. Because it's American Gladiators, and therefore doesn't feature Jet, I'm going to deduct it 5 points, and therefore the score I'm going to give American Gladiators, the game, is -2 out of 10. Sorry, them the rules. Reviews from the era were mixed for American Gladiators across the formats. Amiga Action enjoyed the antics of these roided up fellows and their video game. They gave it an 80% and said the appeal of these Yankee Glads lies in the fact that it is a simple, no-nonsense, all-out action game. Make a mistake and one of the computerized gladiators will immediately punish you. It won't be the last time you compete. You'll be back for more. Nintendo Magazine System UK, they really didn't agree. They gave it a 38% for the Super Nintendo version. Mini challenges form the ultimate test, though most of them just require you to hit the joypad's face buttons rapidly. So yeah, not a fan of that one. Thanks for sitting through all that. That must have been quite the slog for you. I hope you broke it up with a biscuit and a cup of tea, maybe a light bit of masturbation. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Like, subscribe, and thanks, bye.